Taylor Ryan, and welcome to a special edition of Mainely Unspoken. Again, we're talking about the Constitution, and our guest is Mark Finks. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm glad to be here, as always.
Now, last time we were here, you were talking about where we get our rights, where we get our power from.
Yes.
And today you're going to be talking about sovereign power and the Constitution.
Right.
And what do you mean by sovereign?
Well, the sovereign's the ruler. And as we've said in other shows, and we need to keep saying this so people think about it a lot, the sovereign ruler of a state or nation is the person who gets to tell people what to do.
Okay.
He has the power, he says do this, and the people say okay, I'll do it. And the familiar model for this would be a king or an emperor, and in fact that's exactly how the United States' power developed. We had a war for independence in which we had some powers from the English king through the Magna Carta back in 1215 AD, but we were British subjects in the colonies until we had the War for Independence and took the remaining power from King George and gave it to all the people of the United States of America. That's a lot of power because it is literally all the power there is, the power to make treaties, make war, tax people, to try them for crimes and put them in jail or execute them, and that's a lot of power.
It is a lot of power.
Literally all the power that there is.
All the power there is.
Yeah.
But we took it from King George, and then we gave it away, didn't we?
Well, we gave it to the people of the United States, and they had declared where the power came from. We've said in a previous show that the Creator endowed us with unalienable rights that could not be taken away, that among those were life, even the fact that we're alive, liberty, or the power of free choice, and the pursuit of happiness, whatever we decide happiness to be, as long as we don't harm other people. Well, that's how the power came to us. And we had some considerable difficulty trying to run our civilization under the Articles of Confederation. They were too weak and too poorly organized, and they had to have a constitutional convention which they debated all the great issues about how powers should be exercised, whether they should be balanced and separated or not. They decided that they should.
Well, the Articles of Confederation, the reason why it failed, I think, was because the federal government didn't have any powers at all.
Correct. So much was left with the people that the federal wasn't federal. It couldn't function. And
the federal government couldn't even protect us.
Yes, we were in very serious jeopardy, and Washington was writing letters privately to his friends saying, unless we can develop a constitution to save us, I fear that all is lost.
So the people made a concession, and they gave more power to the federal government. Not all of it,
yes,
but some more.
That's correct. They gave limited powers to the federal government in a written constitution, which was designed to bind the office holder with the chains of the Constitution, as the founders said. That is, we didn't send you down there to the seat of government to do anything and everything that comes to mind. We sent you there to do certain specific things only, and nothing else.
So today, when you say sovereign power, the people still have it?
Yes, they do.
Except for what they gave to the government?
Yes, and the government is only exercising power on behalf of the sovereign people, in a limited and definite way. That's how things are supposed to work. That's not how they are working. What's actually happened today is that people have pretty much lost their insight or understanding. We're no longer teaching it in the schools, so they don't understand where the government came from or how it is set up, what type of powers the people really do have, which are massive powers. So they're operating as though the government were kind of a kingdom or empire in which the government has the power and tells us what to do.
But when you say citizens have massive power, I find that hard to believe, because if I don't do what the government says, they'll take out a gun, or they'll have the police come down and arrest me. I mean, I don't see where that massive power is?
Well, it's all described in the Constitution, and the power to vote is a tremendous thing. We've had a peaceful succession of presidents for over 200 years with a vote using the ballot, and the same with the governors of states and state legislatures, congressmen, United States senators, and so forth. It's an amazing record. There's no other country in the world with a record of the peaceful succession of power that's that long, and it's exercising this tremendous power that people have to elect their representatives that keeps that going.
But do you really believe that the people elect the representatives in Congress and the president? I mean, for the president, we have two choices, basically. I mean, I don't see how the people have a lot of say about who's elected president.
Well,
We're given a choice. It's like a 2-year-old. You can have a Hershey bar or a Nestle Crunch. Which one do you want? And there could be a whole candy store, but they're only going to give me 2 choices.
Sure. Well, it does look a little trivial today, and we're getting the quality of government that we deserve in a way, because we're not actively involved in the process. So let me give you a specific example. It's a good example because it has some relevance to the current scene here. George Mitchell is now retired as Senate Majority Leader for Maine, but he and I have had many conversations about this over the years. I think he would confirm what I'm saying. The way the founders originally designed our government, they wanted the popular house in Washington to be the Congress, to be elected by the people, and they wanted the Senate to represent the state governments, regardless of the size of the state or the population of the state. There's 2 senators per state, and then a House of Representatives based on numbers of people for numbers of congressmen elected directly by the people. That was changed around the turn of the century in the early 1900s because there was a populist wave that swept across the country, and people said, oh, no, 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 we have to directly elect our U.S. senators. So then you had 2 popular houses in the Congress, which is not the way it was set up to be. It was originally set up so that the state legislature selected the U.S. senators to go to Washington. And what that did, it did a number of very good things. It made it clear that the senators represented the state governments of their state, where the U.S. House of Representatives represented the people of the state. 2 different voices speaking there in some sense, a different emphasis.
And the states had a lot of power, too. I mean,
the sovereign power of states was supposed to be respected because they were a united group of states with the federal constitution. It also made people a lot more careful who they elected to the state legislatures. It gave that position in state government a much greater importance and visibility. People today are very casual about who gets elected to go to the state legislature. Oftentimes it's just the person who most wants to go. That's about the way it is today. People don't have that sense that they're choosing the person who will be choosing the United States Senator for, in this case, the state of Maine. They're a lot more careful when they're making that kind of choice, and it gives vitality and interest to the process. So in the conversations I've had with George Mitchell, and I've had several of them over the years, he's, interestingly enough, in spite of being an unabashed political liberal, liked the system in which the state legislature selected the U.S. senators from the respective states. And I also like that process. I know that the founders had a good idea there, and that it gave a different emphasis for each of the chambers in Washington the way it was supposed to, and took nothing away, because both chambers had to agree in order for a policy to become a policy, which is still true today. Then they each had their chance to express the viewpoint.
so who's protecting the state today, then? So in Washington, D.C., who protects the rights of Maine against the federal government?
That is an excellent question. When you have fewer people participating, Maine looks pretty good on paper in terms of our voter turnout. We're somewhere up toward the top in percentage of voters who vote. It's in the 70% usually in a national election, which looks pretty good. But the quality of that participation is quite variable. There are some people in Maine who are very interested in candidates and issues and have really made a study of it for many, many years and have a well-grounded opinion. And there are a lot of people who don't, who vote on the basis of emotion or popular appeal or the advertising company image that a candidate's been given, the glitzy TV ad with the dog and the children and walking across the meadow kind of emotional stuff. And we have a lot of room for improvement there in terms of the way people look at issues and look at government. They're kind of discouraged because government seems like this huge thing that is into everybody's lives and telling everybody what to do.
Well, it is, isn't it?
Sure. Well, that's how it's behaving today. Why? Because the sovereign rulers, the people, are so quiet and express themselves so little. We've actually substituted public opinion polls for a discerning ballot process, where it's enough for people in office to do a few focus groups and figure out what people think they want, and then just tell them that they're going to give them.
So they're not even being honest.
Well, many are not. Many of the politicians are just very opportunistic and cynical, and they're using the use of public opinion polling
so
to
they're saying,
steer.
well, what does the town of Scarborough wants? This is what they want, okay, and then the politicians comes up and say, well, this is what I'll give you if you vote for me.
Sure, and it's
so they're lying.
Well, let's just say that's the Charlie Chickenhart school of politics, where you just tell people what they want to hear, and you may or may not do what they want done.
So how do we get the average person in Scarborough, in Portland, wherever, to be more interested in government where they can honestly see how a person will represent them?
Well, what I always recommend, it certainly is the way I've done it in my own life, I carefully studied what the founders intended. And that's how I developed my interest. And I have a very strong interest that has never faded all these years. No matter how rascally the government gets and no matter how rascally the politicians get, I still have my basic understanding of what the founders intended for this country and for this state of Maine. And that's what I pay attention to, because that's where the potential for improvement really is. If more people took an active interest in that history and where the power came from and how great the power really is, and then exercised it themselves through speaking, just the way we are now. We're having a conversation about this that other people can listen to and can be interested and inspired by. You know, they can say, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I should look into it myself and see what's going on.
So you want to vote for people that are very literate concerning the Constitution? Because
Sure.
most politicians today aren't.
Yes, that's correct. They have a very superficial understanding, and they're willing to go with the flow of modern decisions in the courts, which have greatly departed from the intentions of the founders of this country, and not to our benefit, certainly.
Well, what I find amazing is they all take an oath to uphold the Constitution.
Yes, it's required.
It's required, but they
Yeah.
don't understand what that is.
In some sense, they don't. If you have, there were two fellows at the Harvard Law School back in the 19-teens, Roscoe Pound and Felix Frankfurter, and they said, let's make the law into something else. Let's make the law decide cases on the basis of human behavior and opinion, so that when people's viewpoints and behavior changes, the law changes. We'll make the law based on behavior instead of on eternal truth, instead of on the foundational law. And that idea took hold and has become very prevalent. The fancy term for it is sociological jurisprudence, or legal decisions based on man's opinions and practices in society, not on the law. And this is thought to be some great virtue. Oh, this is wonderful. We're architecting society by working with people as they are and so forth. And the real problem is that as society degenerates and spirals downward, we've seen a lot of that in contemporary culture, then the law becomes similarly degraded and debased. And any sensible person who thought that one over would say, boy, that's a bad way to go.
So when people say the Constitution is dead, or it's outdated, or we have to rewrite it, those people haven't really thought through what the fundamentals are and what they would be giving up.
Right.
If they
don't. To me, anyway, for whatever it's worth, it would be pretty hard to surrender something as wonderful as what the founders gave us if you really knew what it was. And these people seem to just go with the flow because they came and found society doing certain things. They said, okay, I'll join in with that. I'll get along and go along, and this is how I'll participate in the political process. I've known any number of local and state representatives who were like that, local councilors and school board members and others. They just came and found this thing and tried to fit themselves into the flow of the process. They didn't come to it with an understanding of how degenerate and corrupt it's become, saying, boy, this is pretty rough stuff. Let's try to do something to counter this destructive trend.
So when you talk about the power of the people, they can't claim their power until they've really studied the Constitution and by the fact that that Constitution really is going to make their lives better because it's going to protect their lives. And it's going to restrain government. It's going to keep corruption down.
It will help.
It will help.
It will help.
But if people don't buy into the fact that the Constitution will really do all this, and if they don't bother to study it, they don't have the power. They're not sovereign at that point.
Yeah, well, there's a poet who wrote a poem that said, one man awake, can awaken another, and the second can awaken a third, and so forth. One man up with dawn in his eyes multiplies, and then the poet was saying that if some are inspired, then others will be. And we need to think very carefully about that, because right now the trend overwhelmingly is toward a type of apathy. I think
But not just apathy, the government isn't teaching the Constitution. So it's more than just apathy, it's almost like engineered apathy.
Well, ignorance and apathy in alliance with each other. It is, if you're trying to use the schools as an instrument of social architecture, you're kind of using them more for propaganda than for education, which in many ways we are today. The government schools are just horrendously PC, politically correct. They have certain viewpoints that they're advancing over other viewpoints. If you're going to have a society that runs that way, it'll become a very dead, devitalized society. The Soviets and the Nazis and others found this out. They could be very repressive and have kind of a party line that was trumpeted from every part of society. The artists had to paint a certain theme, and the playwrights and the dancers, and everybody had to do things a certain way. Well, after a while, the civilization began to die on the vine because the ordinary person realized this was a kind of a dead, put-up deal, and we're approaching that in the United States today, where we actually have a culture that's really, in many ways, quite ugly and uncaring, very focused on me, the individual, and what he wants, what the individual wants, not on the greater good of society in the sense that the framers of our Constitution would have stressed, where they were saying if you want to have a healthy government, you got to have informed and involved citizens, because they have the sovereign power to elect people, and they also have the constitutional restraints to protect them, and that process has to be vital if the people are going to be free and happy, not this amazing collectivist kind of groupthink thing that has been promoted in the United States in the last 20 to 30 years.
Well, even the economy is affected, because if we stayed with constitutional money, even our economy would be better today.
That's right. That's a subject that we'll address more fully in another session, but it all comes back to integrity and the ability to make a statement and keep your word. The trouble that we had that almost collapsed the freedom that we had won in the War for Independence was we had all these continental dollars, these paper dollars out there that said they were redeemable in a Spanish milled dollar. So if you have a continental piece of paper, that the government will give you on demand a Spanish milled silver dollar for that. The trouble was the government didn't have the Spanish milled silver dollars to give for the paper. So the expression "not worth a continental" came about, and people were making like suits of clothes. It looked like shingles on a building. They'd wear them up and down the street just to mock the the lack of value in the paper currency and so forth. And that was when people like George Washington were writing to their friends saying, if we don't straighten this out, we're done. And the Constitution of the United States ruled out the use of paper money, even with the redeemability legend on it, and said we're going back to the coin standard, dollars of silver and ounces of gold quoted in dollars of silver, a bimetallic standard system. And within 3 or 4 years of the ratification of the Constitution, Washington wrote to his friends and he said, if someone had told me that within a few years of ratifying the Constitution we had reestablished our credit throughout the world, I'd have thought him a subject fit for a madhouse, that he would have been, you know, crazy to say such things, but he said it's occurred, and he was very grateful that it had. So while we had an honest currency and did not debauch or debase our currency, we were in good shape. But the enemies of this country have sought for decades and decades and decades to destroy our currency, to thereby destroy the stability and order of our economy and our society.
When you look at this Maine state constitution, and a lot of people don't realize there is a Maine state constitution.
Yes, all of the sovereign states of the United States have a state constitution.
One of the things that they all have, at least, is like a Bill of Rights. Ours is called the Declaration of Rights.
Yes, Article 1.
Article 1. Mm-hmm. And it's a very long article, and it's very similar to the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution.
Yes, has more words.
It has more words.
It has very beautiful words in it.
And then again, that's not being upheld either by the people of Maine.
People are not insisting that that be followed. That's correct. And if they read it and saw what was written in there, they would feel differently about seeing people live up to it.
Do you think that it is just as powerful as the U.S. Constitution?
Because the United States Constitution has been ratified by the sovereign states, the integrity of each of those states as a government, for the same reasons that the federal required sovereign power, is extremely important. This is why in our Maine Constitution, we say, we the people of Maine, acknowledging with grateful hearts the goodness of the sovereign ruler of the universe, all capitals. That would be what we would consider the God of the Judeo-Christian Bible, you know. Acknowledging with grateful hearts the goodness of the sovereign ruler of the universe and affording us an opportunity so favorable to the design, and imploring his aid and direction in its accomplishment, to agree to form ourselves into a state by the style and title of the state of Maine and ordain and establish a government for the same. You know, that's quite a statement. And it's exactly, it incorporates the language of it was written in 1819, ratified in 1820, but it incorporated the language of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution in one document to be a constitution for the state of Maine. What a beautiful statement. So these people were God-respecting when they set the state up, and they said the sovereign ruler of the universe, the creator God of the Judeo-Christian Bible, gives us this opportunity. Why? Well, because he's the creator of everything. Quite a statement.
It is quite a statement, and I'm sure that in the schools they sort of just bypass it.
Oh, it would be a rare student who had ever actually read that and could walk it and talk it and kind of say, well, you know, this is what as we've said so many times before, we've got to keep repeating it. The viewers of this show, this discussion, need to think about this. Do they really deeply believe that the Creator did this, the sovereign ruler of the universe, or that God really is the sovereign ruler of the universe? Or do they sit on the throne of their personal life like a little potentate, you know, selfishly ordering everybody around? That's a counterfeit. That's not the real thing of respecting God and God's giving power to citizens to govern themselves. That's the mindset of a tyrant. Emperors and dictators are those people who are obsessed with their own power and want to force other people to do their bidding.
Do you think people want to be self-governing?
In some sense, yes, but just as the alcoholic or drug addict is trying to fill a hole in their soul that only God can fill, I would suggest to them that if they want to be self-governing, they might prefer to be God-governed and then self-governed.
And when you say God-governed, that's almost being saying being responsible for yourself, your actions, your life.
In a deep way, yes. You're by agreeing with God that He's right in what He says. Then you can govern yourself. The Bible describes it as a spiritual ability. It says that God gives the spiritual ability to live above sin in this present world. He strengthens the inner person with His might and power. And I obviously am saying that as someone who's a believer. I'm a Christian. I believe that. Now, not everybody listening to us is. And they need to think about that in terms of what that means for their life. Just being on the throne of your own life and being a kind of a petty tyrant in the family or something is nowhere near what governing your life based on the truth of what God says is. It's a completely different view of the world, and in the United States we don't require that people be Christian in order to live here or vote. That would be a sorry commentary, because you can't compel people to believe in God. They have to do it of their own free will. That's what the Lord says.
Well,
is
whether
His
they
intention.
believe in God or not, that doesn't have anything to do with their rights as human beings.
They still have the protections that the Constitution affords them, and they have the founders of this country to thank for that, regardless of what their beliefs are. It's like having the benefit of a hospital, college, or university, which was started originally by the Christian people. You don't have to be a believer to go to that hospital or to that college or university.
Because the information's good.
The information's good, but even the idea of knowing things and thinking things through for yourself is basically a biblical idea. That's where the Christians got it.
We have people running for a state senate, for the legislator. What should you ask them? What would you say is the top 3 questions to ask your person running for office?
I think it's worth asking. You ask them if the founders, you have to settle in your own mind and heart what the founders were all about. Were they right in what they said about government and about life? And if you believe those things are right, then you can go to your candidate guy and say, well, who's right? Were the founders right in terms of having the Creator given unalienable rights that can't be taken away from us, and the idea of absolute truth and so forth? Or is this modern socialistic bunch right? Which kind of government do you think we ought to have here in the state of Maine? It's a good question. Then you can follow up. If you could get them to answer that one, which might be a neat trick, then you can follow up with some similar questions, because as soon as the candidate's willing to talk to you, especially if you're maybe developing a relationship with them, then you can kind of get into what they really do think. Say, I really am interested to know, because I've thought about these things myself, and I have a certain view of them, and I'd be interested in what yours is.
We have 1 minute left.
Yeah.
What would you like everybody to remember about sovereign power in the Constitution?
Well, that the power is there, and that it's all power necessary to govern as the founders of this country viewed it, and the founders of the state of Maine in 18, 19, and 20 viewed it. That's quite a subject, and it's something that I hope people will think about and settle in their own minds and hearts. This is a long thought and a preparation process. I hope that they'll do that.
Well, thank you, Mark. And
Pleasure.
we hope you come back.
I will.
Good. We have a lot to learn from you. Well, again, you want to read the Constitution, your state constitution, your federal constitution. You have power, sovereign power. You've got to figure out what that means. You've got to communicate that to the people that are running, so the people get the power back. They already have it. They just don't know it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.